Okay, so we have these 8. Then the I is animated by the life faculty. And then the 10th factor within the I molecule is that particular material element which has the function of registering visible light, visible color. So we get the I molecule consisting of these 10 atoms of matter. And similarly for all of the other sense faculties, they have their 4 elements: color, odor, taste, life faculty, nutritive essence, and then the unique sensory component of that faculty. Whether that the type of matter that hears sounds, the type of matter that can pick up odors, the type of matter that can register tastes, and the type of matter that can pick up tactile sensations. And so we see how matter comes to be treated in greater complexity than in the suttas. Okay, now another theme that comes to be elaborated in the Abhidhamma in terms of this opening up the field of experience, what I call opening up the field of experience to investigation, and that is conditionality, the law of conditionality. In the suttas, we might read again and again, we come across a statement like, in dependence upon the I and visible form, there arises I consciousness, visual consciousness. And so, okay, what's in dependence on, we get a word paticca. It's the same word, let's use another paper. So in dependence on paticca, the I and visible forms, there arises I consciousness. So from the word paticca, related to it etymologically is the word paccaya, which means a condition. So the I and visible form are both paccayas for the conditions for the arising of I consciousness. And in the suttas, that's all that's said. But probably the founders, the formulators of the Abhidhamma, then began to investigate the question, how is visible form a condition for consciousness? How is the I a condition for consciousness? Are they conditions in the same way, or are they conditions in different ways? And this led in time to an unfolding or development of the whole concept of conditionality, until within the Theravada there emerged a scheme of 24 conditions to explain how everything, all of the Dhammas are related to each other. Taking just a few of these to explain how the I functions as a condition, how forms function as a condition. They function in different ways. When we say that the forms function as a condition for consciousness, oh, these people on the left, on my left, you probably can't see. Okay, I'm going to be speaking everything. So forms are a condition for consciousness as object condition. So a category of conditionality is established. One category is called object condition. The I is not an object condition for I consciousness. Of course, you don't see your own eye. If you look in the mirror, you're not really seeing your own eye, you're seeing a reflection of the eye, so you're seeing a form. So the I becomes a condition for I consciousness. Amongst other things, I'll call it a faculty condition. But both of these are a condition for I consciousness in another way, which is the same. They are both called, oh, that's your glasses, okay. There's one type of condition called pre-arisen condition. Venerable Nyanamoli had used the term pre-nascent condition. So if you read the Visuddhimagga, his translation of Visuddhimagga, you come across this rather Latinate word pre-nascent condition. But it means purejata, arisen beforehand. Because in order for I consciousness to arise, the form has to be already existing, and that unit of the I has to have arisen. If the I hasn't arisen and forms haven't arisen, there can't be a visual awareness of that form, that particular form. So they are both pre-arisen condition for consciousness. But then there's a bundle of relationships between, let's say, the four elements, between each other, and between the secondary types of form. Okay, so now the theorists of the Abhidhamma developed the concept of the four primary elements are related to one another by what is called, if you could translate this, mutuality condition. Like they're all holding hands in a circle, dancing together. Each one is sort of lifting its leg, putting its leg down at the same time. So they are mutuality conditions. Since they're all supporting one another, you can't say the earth element is more fundamental than the water, fire, air element. You can't say the fire element is more fundamental than the others. So they're all sort of locked, their hands are joined, and they're all dancing around in a circle, keeping perfect rhythm with one another. So that's why they're mutuality. Trying to think of it, an example from ordinary life of things that are mutual conditions. Maybe it's two people playing ping pong. Each one is a ping pong player at that moment by virtue of the other person. If the other person wasn't on the other side of the net, the other side of the table, you couldn't be a ping pong player just standing with a ping pong ball and a ping pong racket on your own. You need like a partner to ping pong. Anyamanya pachaya. Okay, but now there's a relationship between the four elements and the secondary types of matter. It's different. The four elements and the secondary types of matter arise together. They arise simultaneously. But the four elements have a primary role. The other types of matter have a secondary role. You're making a facial expression like you were shocked by that. Did I say something shocking? Okay. So this is what is called, they are co-arisen conditions. They arise together simultaneously, but they don't support one another equally. They're not equally, balanced. Maybe this is like, okay, while the dance is going on, there are musicians, the music starts playing, and then the dancers start dancing. But the dancing depends upon the musicians, but the musicians don't depend upon the dancers. The dancers could stop dancing, and the musicians can play on. But if the musicians stop playing music, of course the dancers could be moving around, but we wouldn't consider that, or maybe we wouldn't consider that a dance if there was no music. They'd just be like people moving around. Or to take maybe a simpler example, it's like if we have a candle, we have the flame, From the flame there comes light and there comes heat. The flame is the cause for the flame is the cause for the heat and the light, but they arise all simultaneously. So we could say that the flame is a co-arisen condition for the light and the heat. Those are just some examples. But then those are some examples from everyday life. But then the Abhidhammikas apply this in very extensive ways to all of the factors of existence that they're enumerating in the Abhidhamma texts. And then this evolved into what's called the magnum opus, the great work of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is called the Patana. It's the seventh and the last book. So it's this book that enumerates the 24 conditions, and then it runs all the phenomena enumerated within the various outlines of the Abhidhamma. It runs all of those phenomena through the 24 conditions, and then you get a collection within this one treatise. It consists of about 7 fat volumes, which it's about a bit dry reading. Okay, so I just want to sort of run through, again, just very briefly, some of the things done in developing this ontology, the Dhamma theory. So we have here, the function is to open up the experiential field to investigation. And the way this is done is by laying out the schemes of the aggregates, sense bases, elements, defining them in great detail, then explaining in greater detail the different classes of consciousness, the different factors that are present in each state of consciousness, then taking the aggregate of material form, breaking it down into some 24, 28 constituents of material form, and then tying all of these factors together by a scheme of conditional relations. And so you don't have to know all of the 24 conditional relations, but it's useful to understand how, for example, in sensory experience, the eye is functioning as a condition, how forms are functioning as a condition, how sounds are a condition, how the ear is a condition. So this is helping one understand how states of consciousness arise through objects, sense faculties, and through other mental factors, coexistent mental factors. The exposing the causes of bondage and suffering, that's the second major task, and that is done through defining all of the different classes of defilements that I mentioned this morning. So we have, well, this is actually going to tie in exposing the causes of bondage and suffering, prescribing the means to liberation. This will tie in with the attribute matika. Let me treat it in those terms. Okay, to expose the causes of bondage and suffering, the Dhammasangani takes the different groups of defilements that we meet with in the suttas and then traces these defilements to a basic, call it a basic cluster of individual factors that are functioning as defilements in different ways. For example, can I get some help here? I want to go back to something I had this morning. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we have 4 asavas, 4 floods, 4 bonds, 5 hindrances, 7 latent tendencies, 10 fetters, 3 unwholesome roots, The four asavas, does anybody remember what they are? Okay, maybe that's a little difficult one. Okay. The four asavas would be the taint or influx of sensual desire, the influx of craving for existence, the influx of ignorance, the influx of views, wrong views. The four floods, four bonds, defined in the same way. 5 hindrances. Anybody know the 5 hindrances? Excuse me? Okay. Let's get the order. Have to get them in the exact order. Okay. Desire, I heard. Yeah. Sensual desire, what's next? Ill will. Next? Sloth and torpor. Okay, restlessness and... Wait, restlessness and... No. Yeah, restlessness is actually remorse should be the next one. Yeah. Yeah, worry, it's remorse or regret. Restlessness and regret. The 5th one is doubt. Okay, so now when we turn to the Dhammasangani, we find these factors defined, and we see that certain of these factors are defined exactly in the same way. So, okay, we have 3 unwholesome roots: lobha, dosa, moha, greed, hatred, delusion. Okay, what is greed? That which is lust, passion, inclination, compliance, delight and lust, the passion of the mind, wish, infatuation, adherence, greed, greediness, sango, the tie, the swamp, agitation, deception, and so on. It goes a long list of terms. Okay, then we come to the 5 hindrances. Well, actually, I think I chose a bad example. Let us take the example, the asava of sensuality. So how is the asava of sensuality defined? That which is the desire for sensual pleasures, lust for sensual pleasures, delight in sensual pleasures, craving for sensual pleasures, affection for sensual pleasures, the fever of sensuality, infatuation for sensual pleasures, clinging to sensual pleasures. Then how is the hindrance of sensuality, of sensual desire defined? That which is desire for sensual pleasures, lust for sensual pleasures, delight in sensual pleasures, craving for sensual pleasures, and so on. So they're defined in exactly the same way. So in this way, the Abhidhamma will show that, for example, it's just one factor, which is the factor of greed towards objects of sensual enjoyment, one factor which is functioning as the asava of sensual desire, the flood of sensual desire, the bond of sensual desire, and the hindrance of sensual desire. Similarly with ill will, where you find hatred mentioned as an unwholesome root, and ill will mentioned as a hindrance, and the latent tendency of aversion, the fetter of ill will, all will be defined in the same way. So that is indicating that in the suttas, when these different terms are being used, they're really pointing to the same particular factor of the mind, but that factor of the mind is being described metaphorically in different ways, perhaps to drive home to the listeners the binding, the adhesive, the obstructive nature of those mental states. So in this way, we could say that the scheme of the Abhidhamma, this ontological scheme, the scheme of actualities, it's laying bare the factors responsible for bondage and suffering by tying them all together to a certain fixed number of mental defilements. And a similar thing is done with the factors that lead to enlightenment, the aids to enlightenment. We have, for example, amongst the 37 aids to enlightenment, we have the Noble Eightfold Path, the factor right mindfulness. We also have the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We have the faculty of mindfulness. We have the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. If one looks in the Abhidhamma, one finds that they're all defined in basically the same way. So we know that the factors that lead to liberation can be collated into a certain smaller number of beneficial factors. Or to take an example that's not so obvious, in the Noble Eightfold Path, we have the factor of right view. Amongst the faculties, we have the faculty of wisdom. Amongst the powers, we have the power of wisdom. Amongst the 7 factors of enlightenment, we have the factor of investigation of dharmas. Now, if you look in a work like the Dhammasangani, you will find that all of those terms are explained with the same list of synonyms, which indicates that what we call right view and what we call the faculty of wisdom, the power of wisdom, the enlightenment factor of investigation, all of those are basically synonyms. The 4 bases of spiritual potency. One is desire. This is desire in a good sense, the desire to progress, to reach realization. Energy. Then the 3rd is mind. And the 4th is investigation. So investigation, too, as a base of spiritual potency, is defined in the same way as wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, right view. So all of those states converge upon one mental function, the function of wisdom or understanding. And so those are the qualities that are prescribed in order, the faculties to be prescribed as a way of gaining liberation, or we could say also the faculties to be cultivated and developed to reach awakening. So when one takes this whole scheme of dharmas within the old Abhidhamma texts, we see that the dominant concern here is not just the theoretical system, but it's to lay out the things to be directly understood, the things to be abandoned or eliminated, which are the causes of bondage, and the things to be cultivated, which are the means to liberation. Maybe I'll ask if there's any other questions so far, but I'm still going to go further with the other 2 aspects. Let me get my glasses on so I can see more clearly.
What are the 4 things that really exist?
The 4 ultimate existence? Okay, those are chitta, which is mind, chaitasikas, which are mental factors, the factors that arise in association with mind. Then there's rupa, which are material phenomena. And the 4th is nibbana, the state of final liberation. Any other questions of things that have to be cleared up from what I've presented so far?
I'm not sure I understand what's meant by ultimate reality. For some reason, the 3 of those ultimate realities seem to be impermanent.
Yeah, okay, this is a good question, a very important question. And I have to confess at the outset, I'm not so comfortable with that term, ultimate reality, and I think it was a mistake to use that term. But the word that's used in the text, maybe it's best to get a new page. Okay, the word that the teachers of the Abhidhamma settled upon is paramatta, which is a combination of parama, which means supreme. Now the word atta, as used in the suttas, generally means goal, good, or benefit. And so we meet the word paramatta in the suttas, the Buddha's discourses, and there the word means the supreme goal. And that is nibbana. But somehow, maybe over the course of several centuries, the word atta underwent a change of meaning, partly, or at least it acquired other meanings. So it came to mean something like a thing that exists, an existing entity. And so then paramatta came to mean a thing that ultimately exists, that truly exists, that can't be reduced to something else, simpler and more basic than itself. And so the teachers of the Abhidhamma then made a distinction between things that exist paramatta, things that exist ultimately in themselves, things that are irreducible, and what they call sammuti, things that exist conventionally or through consensus. Sammuti comes from the prefix sam plus muti, which suggests together. Sam is together, muti is considered or thought of. So sammuti are things that exist through people thinking together, considering collectively that something exists. But a contrast is made that things that are sammuti, that exist conventionally, would be, say, persons. Again, we come to a Mr. Professor White or Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith. They exist as a single entity conventionally, but what is there from the standpoint of actual existence would be particular combination of 5 aggregates which are ever-changing. So paramatta doesn't necessarily mean that something is permanently existing. As you point out, 3 of the paramattas are impermanent and changing, but they are considered to be things that are not reducible to anything simpler or more basic than themselves. We could say that they are things that are found through a reflective investigation of one's own experience, whereas the self, the person as a solid entity, is not found. It's just a conceptual construct based upon the Dhammas. I saw a hand first. Was there... Okay, this gentleman here.
So could we say the Abhidhamma is a samutta itself?
It is itself.
Because it's a condition that we're creating to try to understand experience.
Exactly, yeah. The Abhidhamma itself as a system is sammuti such as conventional truth.
So then what's true?
Well, let's say it's considered to be a conventional truth that mirrors paramatta dhammas, that mirrors ultimate truth, or things that are truly existent.
And then I see that, but when you say that, then it sounds like it's a house of mirrors. It keeps coming back to itself. As we're going through this through the day, for me, it's a house of mirrors that at some point collapses back on itself, and to all there is just experience, and give the rest of it up. Okay, 2 things I'll say about that. But I wanted to questions that are intended to clarify what I said rather than to debate what I said. But I'll try I'm
to
just
answer.
being your mirror.
Okay. Now I lost the track of what I was going to say. I would say, what I would say is that from the standpoint of the Abhidhammikas, the Abhidhamma, though it is conventional truth, it mirrors ultimate truth adequately enough to provide a map for walking the path to the realization of the ultimate truth of Nibbana. So it's a little bit like, okay, take the analogy of a map to get from here to Los Angeles. The map itself is not the road that one has to walk, and it's just print on a piece of paper with lines and diagrams and so on. But one uses this map in order to choose the road to take to get to Los Angeles. And so the Abhidhamma is laying out, you could say, the map of the things to be understood, to be abandoned, to be developed, in order to reach the goal, which is liberation. And then to say that there's just experience, well, there is experience, but even when we go to the level of the suttas, you can see that the Buddha is distinguishing experience into the different aspect of feeling, perception, volitional activities, consciousness. What I think I don't like about the Abhidhamma, and this is, I have to say very frankly, I'm not an Abhidhammika in the sense of one who defends and upholds the Abhidhamma standpoint. And I think that it took certain, especially as time goes by when we get to the commentaries, certain bypaths which could lead astray from the path to Los Angeles. And that is the conception that seems to emerge largely through this idea of ultimate realities, that things like citta is one thing, getting associated with feeling is something else, perception is something else, volition is something else, and then you get this almost atomistic conception of reality, which is something I'm not so comfortable with. But what I would say is that in actuality, there is experience and different aspects of experience. And perhaps what the Buddha originally intended was just to point out these different aspects of experience. But then, perhaps through seizing too strongly upon words and then taking words to be too seriously as literal truth, then one gets a conception of feeling is one thing, perception is one thing, volition is one thing, consciousness is one thing. But experience is always like a unified whole with different fibers running through it. Any questions of things that need clarification?
I can hardly ask this. The types of consciousness.
Yeah.
Are there types?
Are they?
Are there types?
I'm coming to that. That's sort of jumping the gun. Okay. So let's go on then. Oh, I see. We're supposed to get a break. Yeah. Okay, this is a good time for a break.